Welcome to the Fave podcast, our second edition. I'm Stan Garfield, and I'm pleased to invite friends and family members onto this podcast. Our first one I did with my son Roger, got pretty good response. So here we are with our second edition, and it's a high school classmate of mine, Virginia Scharff. Do you prefer to be known as Ginge or Gingy? Which way can I refer to you?
Either one is
Either
good.
one.
They're
Okay,
both
great.
great.
And we first met in 1970, so 55 years ago when I
Kind of
was
amazing.
it is. I was a senior at Clayton High School. I just moved there from New Jersey. And on the first day of school, there was a couple of people I remembered from having been in fifth grade with him. I lived in Clayton in the fifth grade and the 12th grade. And one of them was John Landau. And he was in the hallway, and I flagged him down and I said that I wanted to work on the newspaper and the radio station. And he said, just a minute. And Arnold was walking by, and I hadn't met him before, but John flagged him down and goes, Arnold, this guy wants to work on the newspaper. This is Arnold Kling we're talking about. And he was your co-editor, is that right, of the
That's
paper?
right. The Clayton High School newspaper.
The Clamo was the high school newspaper.
Yes.
And so next thing I know, he says to John, give me a name, give me a name. And so I gave him my name. And next thing you know, I was assigned to work on the newspaper, which you were the co-editor of. And I think that's how I first met you. I think it was through newspaper people that used to get together. That included Tom Marcus, Jerry Sacker, Tim Poor, I think Judy Rosen. They were all newspaper editors, right? And
Yeah.
I was given an assignment to write a feature story that Judy Rosen called me up with. I was supposed to interview Al Mittleiter. That was my first assignment. So that's how I got started in journalism at Clamo. But that's how I met you, I think, from those kind of get-togethers.
Yep. Yeah, and we used to hang out in your basement a lot and play table tennis. You had a pirate radio station, and it was no surprise to me that you had decided to take up podcasting. It's not been a question of if, but with you, Stan, because you were made for this medium. Obviously, you've been, figuring out independent broadcasting for at least 55 years, as far as I know.
That's right. And even a little before, had the radio station in New Jersey before I came to St. Louis. What happened was when I started the station up in St. Louis, my parents had had enough of the chaos that we had started in New Jersey. So they made a new rule that no one could come through the front door and no one could call on the phone, but they could come through the side door, go down to the basement, and that's where we would hang out. So we followed those rules, and that became sort of the social club for a while, hanging out in the basement.
Absolutely. I mean, you even did a broadcast of the table tennis tournament,
I did.
as I recall.
I,
It was a
I,
lot of back, forth, back, forth.
it was a lot of just hearing the plopping of the ball in the background, but it was between Scott Adzik and Tom Marcus. It was the final, and Tom was the winner. Now, as I recall, Tom was at school with you at Yale, and I don't know if you knew this
Yep.
story, but Tom had told the story of how when he got there, he went to the club table tennis team and wanted to play on it, and the coach was very skeptical about the way he gripped the paddle because Tom had his own unique grip that I actually adopted from him. But anyway, this coach said, "Oh, you can't use that grip, and you can't necessarily play on the team." But anyway, after Tom defeated everyone on the club team using that grip, he said, "All right, that's okay." So let's start some questions about your background. When and where were you born?
So I was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1953, and I lived there for the first 18 years of my life until I went to college and went to the Clayton Public Schools my entire elementary and secondary career and got an amazing public education there.
And where have you lived since then?
Oh my. I mean, well, since then, so I went to college and I lived in New Haven, but then I was just 4 years in the East was enough for me. And so I got into Berkeley Journalism School. So I went and lived in Berkeley for a while and graduated from journalism school, but kind of fled from California and lived in Wyoming. And then I lived in Arizona. And then I lived in, let me see, Colorado, Texas, and now I live in New Mexico. So I've kind of bounced all over the West, and really happy to have landed in the West. For most of my life now. I've lived in New Mexico. I've lived here since 1989.
And what about the West appealed to you?
I like the fact that it was kind of a casual place to be. I love getting out and hiking and seeing nature and seeing mountains and desert and just learning new places and learning places where nobody goes. And I was fortunate enough to be able to hang around with people. I've been married a couple times. I'm on my second husband now, but my first husband was just an amazing kind of orienteer and very interested in a lot and things like that. So we got to a lot of out of the way places. And my second husband, Chris Wilson, is a really great historian of cultural landscapes. So he knows a lot about, particularly about New Mexico landscapes. So we got to see a lot of stuff.
Yeah. What do you like about New Mexico the best?
I like about New Mexico the best the feeling that um, you're in a place where there's no real one kind of dominant ethnic group. That, it is a majority minority state. It is a state where you'll hear Spanish spoken as often as you hear English spoken. You have a real sense of the deep rootedness of indigenous culture. And I really love that about living here. I love feeling like I have so much to learn from the people around me.
When you were growing up, who was in your family? Who were both your immediate and extended family members that you saw?
Oh man. So my parents were both married a couple times, and so I had half brothers and step brothers and sisters, and so there were actually six of us. Most of the time, five of us. The three guys, three boys, and two girls kind of lived in the same house. But I had siblings who were as old, 10 years older than me, and my younger sibling, younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me. So there were always lots of kids around the house. My mom and dad were around. My dad was a life insurance agent. My mom was a full-time mom. And with six kids, she spent about half of her time driving everybody carpools all over the place. So
Mhm.
lots and lots of miles on her Squire station wagon a day. We saw my grandparents. Both of my sets of grandparents were in town until they passed away, and we were around them all the time. And actually, I had an aunt and uncle who lived a block, lots of family.
Did they have, did you have a lot of family gatherings where huge numbers would show up?
We did, and a lot of it, we had a very expandable dining room table, and I had one of my brothers went to the University of Missouri to Mizzou, and the other one went to Washington U, and so they were always bringing their fraternity brothers home. So even when we weren't having a big family gathering, there were like these fraternity brothers who were showing up from time to time because my mom was an incredible cook. I don't know if you remember this, Stan, but she was I mean, I've still not met anyone. My aunt, who is her sister, who just turned 95, and I went to New York to visit her, is a phenomenal cook as well. But my mom she was very adventurous and she loved cooking for large groups of people. And she loved cooking big batches of sticking them in the freezer in case she suddenly had a dozen people for dinner. So there was always just wonderful things to eat
Yeah.
around our house.
When you were in elementary school and later in high school, what did you like to do? What were some of your favorite activities?
Well, I mean, I think all of us who are of a certain age will remember that our parents in this time would just tell us to like go do something, but come back for dinner.
Right.
And so, I mean, nobody was paying any attention to you. There were vacant lots in our neighborhood. We'd go and play baseball in the neighborhood. We had little grass islands. Our neighborhood was kind of in a circle with connected streets in the middle. And so there were little grass islands at the end of the streets, and we'd go have picnics on the islands. Um, we just had a kind of a gang of kids in the neighborhood that all hung out together. So that was really something that I loved in elementary school and made real friends. And then I guess, things I love being on the school newspaper. My entire life, I think I wanted to be a writer. That was just something I, I, I felt most myself when I was writing. And so getting onto the newspaper was a natural for me. And I also love to sing. So I've had, kind of a life in music, singing, not much of a dancer, not really good at that part of things, but love to sing and be in high school plays and musicals and did a lot of that kind of stuff too. And then eventually ended up in learning to play a guitar and started writing songs and was in bands.
When did you start being in bands?
Well, I guess, well, you could say high school, So we had a few of us that used to play together, and Nick Robbins, Mike Davis. We used to play a lot of music together, sang a lot. I learned how to sing harmonies with Mike Davis in the quadrangle of Clayton High School. So we sit down, we listen to every part of every Nash and Young song and figured out three parts or four parts of me in every one of those songs. So that's something that started me off on that path. And then I played with rock and roll bands or sang with rock and roll bands in college. And then when I got into graduate school, I started learning to play the guitar and played with different bands in California. And then when I moved to Wyoming, really gigging a lot with bands.
When you were singing in a rock and roll band, was there any role model that you had? Was there any singer you identified with?
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions you asked is what was the first album you ever bought? And I bought the first album I ever bought was Surrealistic Pillow.
I was wondering if
And
you
I
would be
read an
Grace Slick.
100%, and when I read an interview with Grace Slick and they asked her what her ambition was, and she said to sing louder. And she was not a soft singer, and
No.
I am a soft singer. In fact, my ambition, more recently, I guess in the last 30 or 40 years of my life, has been to sing softer. So, because I know I have a pretty strong voice, but I love just her phrasing and her fearlessness. And I've learned to appreciate all different kinds of singing in more. I have always just loved singing as well, but in the rock and roll world, definitely Grace Slick, definitely get up there and just wail.
Did you actually cover Jefferson Airplane songs in your bands?
I did.
Yeah.
I did, back in the college years. But, it's really funny, Stan, because this year I went to my 50th college reunion and our old college band was asked to play. And so we were there and we were, doing set lists, but we were like, oh, sing this one, sing this one. And the ones that they really wanted me to sing were soul songs and then Linda Ronstadt covers, which Linda Ronstadt's my other massive, massive idol.
Hmm.
Um, but, they didn't really want me to go for the Grace ones, and I was fine with that. I don't know that I have the pipes for that anymore.
When you were young, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I remember being asked that when I was in the fourth grade at
Hmm.
Merrimack School, and
Yeah.
my answer was President of the United States.
Okay.
And I know that your viewers and listeners was, but in fact, I was never able to realize that ambition. But truly, honestly, all I ever wanted to do was write. And so getting on the school newspaper, I thought, maybe journalism is the career for me. I turned out, I went to journalism school. I wrote a lot of features. I got to interview Harvey Milk at one point. I got to do some really great things as a journalist, but I just was terrible. People hard questions. And so I ended up deciding, okay, well, the dead don't sue for law. So, and I'd always loved history, always, always, always. History was my favorite subject, always. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I could be a historian. And I started learning the research skills, went to grad school in history, got a PhD in history from the University of Arizona, had gotten a master's at Wyoming, and have been a historian ever since. Although I've continued to think of myself, I think, primarily as a writer, and actually branched out at one point and that it was time for me to do something I had always wanted to do, which was write fiction, and ended up publishing a series of mystery novels.
The It's interesting about your attitude on journalism. I was similar. I went to journalism school my freshman year, And I had a similar kind of thought. I didn't really want to bother anyone with negative questioning, right? But that was kind of like the mission of a reporter, was to ask a question that your subject didn't necessarily want to answer. And I thought, well, that's not really what I want to do. So that's one of the reasons that I didn't stay with journalism. I think the same thing happened with my son, who started out as a journalist. He was always, reluctant to be writing about coaches being fired and things like that. They were unpleasant. So there's that side of journalism that we didn't think about when we got into it. So at any rate, you ended up getting 4 degrees, and that's impressive. Did you enjoy all your time in college and university?
I really did. I really loved it. I felt so fortunate. I was in I guess it's like the third class of women to graduate from Yale. And I felt so lucky to be there, even though it was kind of crazy because we were so massively outnumbered by the guys. I mean, the ratio was 4 guys for every girl when I was at Yale. And that was made things a little strange, I have to admit. But I just loved it. And I loved the opportunity to take classes from unbelievable professors. When I went to Berkeley, I had fantastic journalism professors who I feel like gave me the discipline to be a professional writer. So you have to write every day. You have to write about an assigned subject. You have to turn in good work. You have to take ridiculous amounts of criticism. I mean, those kinds of things were really me. And then when I went and just decided, okay, I'm going to get a master's in history and see how that feels, and then decided to go on and get a PhD, um, I guess, the thing that I learned was that it was an incredible delight to do the research, to go into an archive, to sit there, to give yourself eye strain looking at microfilm or whatever, or to hold like some incredibly fragile piece of paper in your hands. Or, eventually I wrote a book about the women in Thomas Jefferson's life and what they meant to him, and to be able to hold Jefferson's mother's Bible in your hands.
Yeah.
These were the kind of things that were so exciting to me. And I guess, it's really funny. I found a calling without expecting that I was going to do that.
When you were at Yale, you were with 3 other Clayton graduates. What was that like? Did you see them much? Did you have just different circles of friends? What was it like?
I did see them to a certain extent. We ended up having different circles of friends. But two of them, Tom Marcus and Peter, residential college. And so they went, we saw each other. We saw each other a lot our freshman year, because we were kind of like leaning on each other
Mhm.
to have some semblance of a normal life with each other. But, later on, I think probably our paths diverged. I got more involved with the group of people who were kind of around the music scene. And so my closest friends became people that I ended up either like playing with formally or informally in different configurations.
So, what was your first full-time job?
And so, well, I had a lot of part-time jobs and weekend jobs and summer job things like that, but I didn't actually have a full-time job until I was out of journalism school. And it was a job, I couldn't get a job in journalism because, as I say, I was not that good at asking people unpleasant questions. But I did get a job with this thing called the Expressive Writing in Schools Project. And it was a federally funded project, get kids to write by letting them express themselves. And it was kind of a poets in the school. And so I went over there, and my job was to be editor and publisher of their journal of children. And so I said, okay, I know how to edit and I know something about how to publish things. And they're like, well, when you publish things, what this means is you're going to have to learn how to run a press, a printing press, and you're going to have to learn how to like lay stuff out in a way, So the experience working on the school newspaper actually did help, but I had to actually get into their district office and run this press that was almost like a mimeograph machine, and lay things out. But the thing that I found, that the poets that I worked with, who were the ones who were working directly with the kids on their writing, it hadn't occurred to that the kids' writing would need editing. I mean, because they were poets and they're like, the kids express themselves. And it's really, and I'm like, well, but these kids, there's spelling errors, there are grammatical errors in here. I know you want to have the authentic sound of their voices, but when their parents see this stuff that's full of errors, either they're going to think that I was careless as the person who put this journal together, or they're going to think that you're doing a terrible job of teaching them to write. So, what do you want me to do? So, they're like, okay, well, if you're going to edit them, you need to ask the kids permission and you need to consult with them. So, I ended up actually working with kids, teaching them how to edit their writing. And that was kind of cool. So, I did that for a while, but it was just, I'll tell you, Stan, I mean, I don't know how much experience you have with really hideous commutes, but I was living in Oakland and cross the Richmond Bridge, the Richmond San Rafael Bridge to Marin County, to like northern Marin County, to not northern, but to Fairfax, sort of middle Marin. And it was, best case scenario, it was 2 hours a day out of my life. And worst case scenario, I might still be there. So that kind of wore thin on me after
Yeah,
a
yeah.
while. But yeah.
So you've had a distinguished career. What would you think are some of the highlights of that great career?
Well, as I say, it's always been about writing. So I think I knew I wanted to to publish books, and I was able to take my dissertation to a trade publisher and get it published as my first book, which was called Taking the Wheel: Women in the Coming of the Motor Age. And I'm still getting little bitty royalty checks on that book. So I'm kind of into it,
That's
get
great.
enough to like go buy lunch at a fast casual place. Um, but I've written or co-written or edited 13 books, including works of history and fiction. And to me, that's my legacy. That's that along with the fact that I trained a very large cohort over the almost 30 years that I was a professor at the University of New Mexico, of grad students who are still doing great work in the historical field. I'm retired from UNM now, but um, I was able to do that. And I want to mention one other thing, and this speaks too to some of the other questions that you've asked, which is that back in 2003, I was fortunate enough to get recruited to be a historian, and at that time I was the position I was recruited for was called Women of the West Chair at the Autry Museum in LA. And so for 22 years, I have been serving as a kind of consultant in various positions at the Autry Museum, going back and forth to LA. This is the third exhibition I've worked on curating. I've done some books with them, and that's really been a delight of my life to do history in the public in a public facing.
So when you're writing fiction versus nonfiction, what do you switch modes? What's it like? Do you like one more than the other? Do you like them equally? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when I was working, I have holding down a full-time job as a university professor, and people would ask me this question. They would say, well, how do you switch from history to fiction? I say, I have dinner, because I figure, the history department and the historical profession can have me until 7 o'clock at night, and then I eat dinner, and then I have a couple hours where I can go write fiction. But it's really, um, I think to write history, what you're doing, you're constantly having to check to make sure that what you're saying is true. Whereas when, so it's a slower process, it's a winnowing process. You're at the perfect quote. Everything is very deliberate. But for me, at least, writing fiction was something where I had to resist the impulse to be deliberate and rather just sort of open my brain to whatever the world was presenting me with. And instead of trying to make my characters do stuff, I had to basically sit there and wait for them to talk to me and hear the voice. I felt like they had to have their own kind of human integrity in a way that for anyone to believe that they were real or to believe that they were worth paying attention to. So it was very, very different kind of mental exercise.
Did you get equal satisfaction out of writing both?
Yes, absolutely. I love both. I mean, um, I guess I just love the kind of the different endorphin rushes of finishing some piece of historical writing and saying, okay, now what I've done here is the best I possibly can to persuade you that what I'm telling you is true. Okay. That was very satisfying for me, and I work really hard, many, many drafts of anything in order to make that happen. Um, you hear my dog moaning in the background. She probably thinks that's overblown, but whatever. And then when it came to writing the fiction, I just love the idea that something could come at me unexpectedly. So in my third book, which was called Bye Bye Love, there's a character in the at the end of the first chapter who comes walking out of the woods on this very snowy day in the middle of the mountains in Wyoming, and he's wearing a fisherman's net sweater that's covered with blood, and he looks exactly like Willie Nelson. And I'm like, who is he and what is he doing here? And so I just kind of like waiting for him to tell me, who he was. And it was like, he turned out to be a doctor. And I'm like, really? So, um, things like that would happen. And it was just, I could sit back and have a moment of delight at, okay, I'm gonna follow this where it goes. And it was just tremendous fun also not to be bound by the rules of history, to be able to just make stuff up.
So you said you retired from the university, but it sounds like you're still active. What have you been doing since you became professor emerita?
Oh man. Well, I've been doing this gig at the Autry, so we've done some exhibitions, and that's been the kind of role. My title now is Chair of Western History at the Autry. So, I've moved from focusing on women to focusing on and so now what I'm doing is the third exhibition, which is titled Life, Liberty, and Los Angeles. And it's an exhibition that is about the ways in which the various different Angeles from before the founding of the Pueblo of Los Angeles, when it was still indigenous country, up until now, have done everything they could to claim their right to pursue this. And I have worked on each of the exhibitions that I've done with a wonderful curator, the senior curator now at the Autry, Carolyn Brucken. And so this is a thinking partnership that I've really enjoyed. I love working in museums because you have to work collaboratively. And, as somebody who has been mostly a historian and a writer, you're sitting in front of a screen or you're, teaching students or something like that. And it doesn't like the same kind of like, you have to respect other people's expertise. You learn so much from them. There are many parts of a project that no one person could do, and there's a different kind of satisfaction from that kind of work.
Do you have any responsibilities as grandmother? Do you have to look after any local grandchildren?
Yeah, I mean, nothing formal,
Okay.
it's been a while. I had a weekly gig with one of my grandsons when he was first born, but that's, it's more on a kind of, my God, we can you take over for because these are my son and my daughter both live in town. My daughter's a lawyer in town, and my son is actually a professor at the university, a professor of epidemiology in the College of Population Health. And so they had babies 3 weeks apart. So we have two 3-year-old grandsons in town who are cousins. And so they're the cousin brothers, and we're already telling them they have to be a bluegrass band. We're already discussing the instruments every play. But yeah, we see them all the time. I'm going to see them tonight, and they just tear it up. They're so much fun. You know what grandchildren are like. I mean,
Yes,
they're the greatest.
they
It,
are.
it couldn't be better.
And what is a hobby or an interest that you enjoy?
I guess I kind of take after my mom in that I love to cook. And I like to, I have been, the other thing is that ever since I was a young hippie in college, I went and hung out at a commune outside of New Haven a lot. And I actually lived there for a while and still have really fond memories of that. And I learned about organic gardening. So I've been a gardener for 50 years. And so I really believe in kind of seasonal eating. I believe in, going kind of produce forward with things. We eat a lot of delicious local kinds of stuff, and we're still gardening, although I have to say climate change has made gardening very, very challenging, particularly in the Southwest. I've spent, 50 years adapting to whatever climate's here and been gardening in the house that I live in for 35 of those 50 years. And that garden has been transformed because it's just hotter and drier.
Mhm. All right. Well, now we're going to switch to the Fave Five questions, which are about books, food, music, sports, and humor. So we'll start with what do you like to read?
Um, well, I mean, I read a lot of history because too, and I love doing it. I read a lot of fiction. I read some literary mystery novels like crazy because I had to read them to write them.
Mhm.
I read romance novels just because I think they're fun and some of them are really brilliantly written, and I admire the craft of that. Some I can't read anything that is not well written, and so I give myself permission to basically pick up a book, and if I can't get myself through the first page, I get rid of it.
Yeah.
I don't feel compelled to
Yeah.
finish a book if I start it. And I just read all the time, really. I think we all do. I mean, it's funny because everyone thinks kids don't read because they're looking at their phones, but they're also reading on their phones. They're reading stuff. And people, yes, they're getting sucked down the rabbit hole of really stupid stuff to read, but
Yeah.
they're reading. What if we could divert that reading habit?
Well, it'll be interesting as we go through this series of podcasts to see. Sometimes I'm going to get the answer probably that I don't read. So not too much of that. Um, what author or book would you like to recommend to our listeners?
You know, one of the books that I have loved most, I want to say over the past 20 years or 30 years maybe, is a book by a guy named Christopher Moore called Lamb. And he is, um, I guess you would call him a satirist, but in a way also a literary novelist. He is extraordinarily funny. And this is a book about the story of Jesus Christ by his boyhood pal Biff. And so it's all written from the point of view of Biff. And I'll just give you one little preview, which is that the book opens when they meet and they're in Nazareth and they've gone to the well with their moms. And so both little boys are just, they're very like 3 years old or something, and they're sitting there. And Biff has a younger brother who's kind of a bad kid or whatever. And so sitting there and they see this lizard go by, and he's with his younger brother and his friend Josh, Jesus. And the younger brother takes a rock and smashes the head of the lizard. And Josh just looks at it and then he picks up the lizard and he sticks the head in its mouth and the tail starts wiggling. And and Biff says, at that moment, I knew there was something a little special about Josh. Right. And so they go and they have this epic quest all over the world to find enlightenment. And Josh just kind of goes, he is the voice of rationality, and Josh is the voice of spirituality. And it's so delightful and it's so kind of soul opening in a lot of ways. And it's so hysterically funny. I recommend this book to everyone.
Great, thank you. All right, what do you like to eat? You said you like to cook, but what do you enjoy eating the most?
Um, I would say, I mean, it's tomato season, right? right now. So we're cooking everything with
Yeah.
tomatoes. And we also have a peach tree in our backyard. So we're cooking everything with peaches that you can imagine. And the older I've gotten, the less I'm interested in kind of eating meat that I am. And,
Mhm.
I had the hippie flirtation with vegetarianism, which failed dismally. I'm not saying I'm a vegetarian. I'm still a big fan of the BLT as a solution of what to do with with tomatoes, right? Or
Mhm.
club sandwich in the St.
Yeah.
Louis tradition, right? But so I love stuff like that, and I love, pastas with lots and lots of vegetables, and love fresh seafood. I mean, I live in New Mexico, so fresh seafood is not something that we have, we do have access to like your basic kind of whatever Whole Foods stuff, but
Mhm.
when I'm on the coast, I'll eat fresh seafood like a fiend.
If we were to share a meal together, either if we were to go out to dine out at a restaurant or if you were going to serve me at your home, what would we be eating? Or would you take me?
Well, so probably if it's wintertime, it might be some kind of a soup or
Hmm.
a braise, something like that. I love making soups, hot and probably I'd make you a soup or a stew of some kind. Or if it's summer and it's just, right now with the incredible tomatoes and zucchinis we're getting, some kind of really robust vegetable dish with tomatoes and zucchinis, and probably with like a ton of Parmesan breadcrumbs with olive oil and garlic on top, so that it'd be really delicious. And then a real fresh salad and some kind of dessert, either if we have fruit on hand with fruit or, my Aunt Vi's butterscotch brownies are a real staple around here.
Sounds good. How about if we were to go out somewhere in Albuquerque, where would you take me?
I'd probably take you to a restaurant that is run by two of my favorite people, Jennifer James and Nellie Bauer, called French-ish. And it's got a relatively small menu. It's got a great vibe. They're always there in the kitchen cooking. And it's really French standards, steak frites and some kind of a fish dish, and
Mhm.
usually a burger on the menu, and then some kind of a special with whatever is wonderful in terms of seafood and things like that. And they always have amazing desserts. So we a glass of rosé too.
So on to music. You expressed your love of music both as a singer, and I know you were also a big fan of music. Do you have a favorite song or musician or concert or album that comes to mind?
Hmm. I had such a hard time thinking about that question because
Yeah,
it's just changed so much.
yeah.
For the many years. I guess, I started out really loving rock and roll, but then when kind of country rock came in, I became a real devotee of that. I love Graham Parsons, anything involving Graham Parsons. I love the Flying Burrito Brothers. I love the song Return of the Grievous Angel. I have sung that song with probably 15 different singing partners whose voices blend with me, who all love that song. And so, I mean, in a way, that's a little bit of an anthem for me, And one of my history books is called 20,000 Roads, and it's a little cut from the Return of the Grievous Angel,
Yeah,
20,000 Roads I went down, and they all led me straight back home to you. And
yeah.
so that's my song.
I
I love
recall
Emmylou Harris.
that you were into the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album by the Byrds that had Graham Parsons on it when it came out.
Absolutely. I mean, I can remember listening to that at Georgia Castle's house, or, when I was a junior in high school, and we were on the newspaper. This was right before you came in, Stan, and this was the newspaper group. And I don't remember if it was Georgia or Miriam Pepper's house, but somebody's parents weren't home. Decided we're going to cook dinner, and we listened to that album for 3 hours. We just kept playing it, letting it return, right?
Hmm.
On the arm, right?
Hmm.
And cooking this dinner, and it was I'll never forget it. What a great album.
No, there was a concert at Washington U when I was there that Nick Robbins and I went to. It was the Byrds, and Clarence White was in the band at the time, and it was
I went
just.
to that concert.
Were you there too? It was
I
just
was there. I was absolutely there. I might even have been with you guys,
Maybe,
but
but
I definitely was there. Yeah,
it wasn't that long before Clarence passed away. It was like one of the last times he performed.
exactly. Yeah, well, I mean, I went to that concert, and that was probably like our freshman or sophomore year in college,
Yeah,
maybe.
probably.
And then I went back to New Haven for school, and they were also playing in New Haven. Saw them then. So I got to see that tour twice, and Clarence White's voice still just elicits a kind of, let alone his playing, obviously, but I mean that soulful voice is just gets me right in the lizard brain.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So, what was the first record you bought and the last concert you attended?
First record was Surrealistic Pillow,
Okay,
of course,
good choice.
and wore it out. Me and Bonnie Schwab listened to that record, 150 million times. Um, and then the last concert I attended was just a couple weeks ago, and it was a free concert on the Albuquerque Old Town Plaza. And I don't know, I mean, Stan, you know everything about music. So have you ever heard of a guy named Chuck Prophet,
Yes,
who was like a 70s and 80s San Francisco guy?
yes.
The whole psychedelic. Well, he's now playing with a band called Cumbia Boots. So he's got a cumbia band,
Mhm.
and it was absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And we took my son and daughter-in-law and grandson and everybody danced, and it was just, I mean, we had the best time ever. And just they're doing these free concerts on the Old Town Plaza. And I'm like, we need to do this more often. And the funny part was, we had not realized what a scene Old Town was for music on weekends in the summertime. So there were people busking all over the place. We parked by the Albuquerque Art Museum. Uh, there was a blues band playing at the art museum. And so there was just, a lot going on. And I mean, if you got free music, you got to go.
Oh, that's great. No, we have a lot of that in Ann Arbor, and we take advantage of it here. And it's great to have free music on a regular basis.
Oh, what a treat.
On the
Yeah.
Surrealistic Pillow album, one of the interesting things about that was, in addition to the rock songs, there were really these other songs like Embryonic Journey, and it's interesting
Yeah.
that mix. At the time, I don't think I ever realized it. It just seemed natural, but looking back on it, it seemed odd that there was such a range on what seemed like it was a psychedelic rock album.
Well, and I think there was already, if you think about the kind of finger picking that Jorma Kaukonen did,
Yes.
and Jack Cassidy with incredible bass playing. And when they got into Hot Tuna, it was such a different
Yeah.
vibe
Yeah.
from that kind of rock stuff. And I actually saw them together, oh God, who knows, in pandemic years, I don't know how many years ago, but it feels like it was really recent. They were opening up for the Tedeschi Trucks band.
Hmm.
And what a great show. I mean, and they played, the catalog, right, of the Hot Tuna stuff. And
Yeah.
it was just great. Love that.
Now, do you enjoy watching sports at all?
100%. Yeah. I mean, we watch a lot of soccer. We're
Mhm.
season ticket holders to the New Mexico United.
Okay.
Uh, uh, Not MLS, whatever it is, the USL
Okay.
team. So we have a good time watching them, and we'll even watch like away games on TV and stuff. We watch tennis, we watch baseball, of course, but not, I mean, I don't follow baseball the way I did growing up as a completely passionate. I'm still a Cardinals fan, but like,
It's interesting that
I think
everyone that
that's
grew up in
genetic.
St. Louis seemed to be a lifelong Cardinals fan. That was a function of St. Louis, don't you think?
Yeah, you have to be. You have to be. I mean, it was kind of like if they drum you out of the core if you weren't. Um, I guess, I love women's basketball. I actually recently went to LA so that I could see a LA Sparks Indiana Fever game and
Okay.
watch Caitlin Clark be on the bench.
Yeah. Yeah. Barb
Yeah.
said she wants me to take her to Indy to see Caitlin Clark play. I said, well, we're going to get a franchise here in Detroit in a few years. Just wait till
I'm
then.
sure you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? There's no question that, by the time she's really maybe if she can get Indiana to be competitive once she's back in there, that she'll spend a few years there and she can end up in Detroit or
Could be.
some more major market. Yeah.
Now, I recall that you were a bridge player back in high school. Do you still play?
No, I
No.
don't. I mean, I will say my first husband was a spectacular bridge player, and we played a lot. I have never been a patient bidder. And so, he'd bid a suit, and then I'd bid things way up, knowing that he'd make
Okay.
the trick. He'd
Yeah.
make the game.
Yeah.
He got tired of playing with me because I was just a little too
I
adventurous.
see. Well, that's been one of the things that pandemic. I started up playing bridge online with people, so now I've been playing a lot. So that was another benefit of it. Not that many people playing it
And
anymore, though. I don't know that it'll last as a sport as a game. Do you?
really, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, do I know people who still play bridge? Not that many, actually. But I bet if I was still playing bridge, everybody I know would be one.
Right,
So,
but the
but it's
young
great
people aren't.
people do that online.
Yeah, the young people aren't taking the time to learn it. Is what I'm concerned about. So it may
Yeah.
go away. But so do you have a favorite athlete or team or sports memory?
A favorite Yeah. So when I was growing up, my grandfather had, and then my father had season tickets to the St. Louis Cardinals. And the first seats we ever had, and this was in the Busch Stadium that was there before they built the one for the 1960 that opened in 1964. And so our seats were literally right behind the dugout right at third base. So my grandfather was like one of the original ticket holders for the franchise. And so he had great, great, great seats.
Yeah.
And I can remember that the ball players used to, if a foul ball came into the dugout, they would roll them to us.
Uh,
And then we'd roll them back, get them to sign them. So we'd get like, Stan Musial and Bob Gibson and Kurt Flood and,
yeah.
all these to sign our baseball. So that's probably the best sports memory that I have.
Were any of those your favorite player?
Um, I always liked Bob Gibson, but I love Ozzie Smith, who played late, obviously
Yeah.
later for
Yeah.
them. So I definitely had to. I mean, I have to say now, who cannot have Shohei Ohtani be their favorite player? I mean, the guy he's Mr. Baseball.
Right.
I because Mrs. Autry owned the Angels for so, and because Gene and
Yeah.
Jackie owned the Angels for so
Yeah.
long, she's an interest in the owner's box at Angel Stadium, and so we used to get to go be in the owner's box, the skybox or the field box, and get to see the Angels play. And I got to see Ohtani both pitch and hit a home run in
Oh,
the
that's
same
great.
game.
That's
And
great.
that was like, I love Ichiro. I love, I guess I'm doing baseball players now,
Do you ever
but
go
I
to
mean, it could be,
do you ever go see the Isotopes?
do I have definitely been to see the Isotopes any number of times. And, you got to love that they're that
Yeah.
they got their name from the Simpsons, right?
Right.
So
Right. That is
great,
great.
great swag, great merch for the Isotopes.
All right, moving on to humor. You have a favorite comedian or comedy film or TV show or book that you comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I love that question. And there's an absolute runaway answer, which is I love Steve Martin and I love The Jerk.
Okay.
The Jerk, I think, is the funniest movie ever made. And I could still quote you chapter and verse from The Jerk, if you wanted me to. But I think he is the most brilliant. I'll read any of the books that he writes. I read all of his stuff in the New Yorker. I'm thrilled that Only Murders in the Building continues to
Yeah.
churn it out. And
Yeah.
I have such a good time watching that. So for me, Steve Martin makes anything
Yeah.
happen.
I just finished reading recently Steve Martin Writes the Written Word, which is like a compilation. And I reread stuff that I had read before, but I was laughing again. So
Yeah. Yeah.
have
It's
you seen
just,
him
the
perform
moment
as
of,
as a bluegrass musician?
I have not.
That's a good
Nope.
thing to go
Oh
see.
yeah, yeah, oh, yeah. Brass musician. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, those are the YouTube videos that I'll click on,
Okay.
if I'm just scrolling endlessly. Yeah, love it. So good.
And who is the best at making you laugh, and who are you able to crack up?
You know, um, When I was growing up, my mom was the best at making me laugh. And we used to get the giggles and be uncontrollable about something we saw on TV or
Mhm.
whatever, some really stupid bit. And we'd make each other laugh. And I have girlfriends who've been my girlfriends and they live all over the country now. And I've known them for 50 years or whatever. And we still make each other laugh. And I would say, and now my grandsons really make me laugh. And they're at 3, they're just jokes. And their jokes are not real jokes, but they deliver them as jokes.
Yeah.
And that makes me laugh.
Yeah. And who are you able to crack up?
I crack them up because I
Crack
will
them.
sit and I look at them and I stare at them very closely and I say, don't laugh. And then they'll laugh. It's easy.
My oldest grandson, I'll ask him who's the silliest. He'll say, you're the silliest, Papa. And he says, and I'm the second silliest. All right. So now
All
we
right,
come.
I
Yeah.
have mine.
Time for a story. I've asked you to tell us a story of your choosing. So what have you chosen for a story today?
Um, it's a funny story because the story I was thinking about was about you asked about a turning point in my life. It's a very, very short story. When I was going to graduate school in history, I did a this National Endowment for the Humanities funded summer humanities program called Mountain Plain Chautauqua. And we traveled through Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas, and then both North and South Dakota, doing humanities programs where we reenacted historical figures and we did these different kinds of workshops for the local communities in small towns, 12 different small towns in these 4 states. And it was really grueling, I have to say. I mean, we had a bus that we traveled with, we had a tent that we traveled with, 12 weeks on the road, putting up a tent and taking it down and doing all this stuff with the local community. It was a great my whole life, but I was just thinking, oh my God, I mean, this is so exhausting, and I'm really not sure. That sound you hear is of my dog scratching behind us. I'm gonna have to find out what that's about. But so really exhausting. And I thought, man, can you really make a decent living as a historian? I mean, is this something I should be doing? Maybe, I probably should go to law school. And so, I'm like sitting there in like this motel room in Wolf Point, Montana during the Wolf Point Stampede, which was a rodeo, and this was a res town, so it was a wild, wild, wild rodeo, just town right off the reservation. And I'm just this flea bag motel and thinking, my God, is this life, right? I'm going to go to law school. And so the next day I called up my mom and I said, I really think I need to go to law school. And it took her a second. And then I hear from her and she said, what are you talking about? You don't want to go to law school. You've already chosen your calling, or it's chosen you. Just get on with it and get the PhD and be a historian. That's what you're good at. You want to write, you can write. And I thought, all right, she's not, taking any baloney. She doesn't want to hear about me having that dark night of the soul about my chosen career. And she's just saying, you've already stepped out on this path, you do it. And it was really good advice. So for me, that was a turning point, and I owe it to my mom.
That's great. It looked like a pretty good decision.
Worked out, I think.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to end by telling a brief story about when we started becoming friends. It was, you mentioned you came over to my house. Our house was kind of a gathering place, but even before we got the radio station going, I remember early on you and some of the other newspaper gang coming over to the house. And this was interesting because my dad sort of took note of this. I hadn't had girls come over to my house before, so this was like his radar went up. So later on, one time he was asking me about Gingy and Judy, and I think he had interest like where was this going to go, and but that was before we moved to the basement and started having the regular hangout there. But we had the radio station when I started up again. It was first done without my parents' approval because they didn't want that hassle that had been in New Jersey. So, but I thought I could fool them. I put this transmitter in my room and I told my dad that it was a piece of stereo gear. And he didn't have a lot of tech savvy, so he bought that for a while. But eventually, he figured out that we were tricking him, that we had put an antenna up in the attic, and he had gone up there and ripped it down. So we had this sort of confrontation. But then we reached the agreement, the accord by which we could move to the basement and not bother them anymore, and the station lived on. So that was a lot of fun. If you recall, we used to play. It was like an album-oriented rock station on AM. That was our, back then, not everybody had FM radio in their car. So being on the AM dial and playing album, FM style rock was our thing, and the occasional ping pong match. So anyway, it was always great to have people like you coming over to the house, and I enjoyed that. Kind of helped me get going in my social life back then. So I want to thank you for your time today and joining us for this podcast interview. You've certainly done a lot of impressive things, and I'm certainly glad to have the chance to talk to you about them.
Well, it's been a real treat for me and I'm honored that you invited me to come on. And it's great to talk to, and it's always, 55 years later, it's still a lot of fun and great to see you still, upholding the banner, upholding the Jolly Roger of Pirate Podcasts. So, here's to you, Stan, and here's to keeping in touch.
Well, thank you.